Hi kids, welcome back to Yupp Master, and we've begun with the phylums of the invertebrates, okay, the non-chordates. So let's continue with Phylum Annelida. Now before we start with Phylum Annelida, let's just have a brief recap of all the phylums that were involved in the invertebrates and in the non-chordates. So we began with the phylum which was of the sponges. Do you remember the name of that phylum? It was called as phylum. It started with all phylum Porifera. Okay, poriferans are the ones which are the sponges, right? After porifera came the ones which started moving. The animals which started moving were the animals which belong to the phylum called as Cnidaria. So after porifera, we began with the phylum which was called as Cnidaria. All right. After Cnidaria were those animals which were observing bioluminescence, and those animals are what we called as Ctenophora. So it was Ctenophora. Okay. After Ctenophora, we began with the three types of worms that were involved. First, we talked about the flatworms, then we moved on to the roundworms, and finally, today, we'll be talking about the ringworms. So, what was the name that we used for worms? Do you remember that? A common name, or rather a common suffix which was used for worms was called as helminth. So, when we talk about the flatworms, we call those as platyhelminth. Alright, flat was platy, and for worm we use the word helminth. Alright, so these were platyhelminth. Then the roundworms were called as the aschelminthis. Alright, and today we'll be learning about the ringworm, and the ringworm are called as the Annelida. The annelids. Alright, after Annelida we come to the next phylum. Remember, A for Annelida immediately began with another A, and that would be the arthropoda. The arthropods. Alright, after arthropod came the molluscans, mollusca, and then the animals with the spines on their skin. Spine, echino, and skin, derma. So we call these animals as echinodermata. Alright, okay, and we're going to be ending the whole classification of non-chordates with the ones which have properties of both. That would be the hemichordata. Alright, so children, we've completed with porifera, we completed Cnidaria, we also completed Ctenophora. We began with the worms where we learned about the platyhelminthis and the aschelminth. Today we'll be learning about the Annelida. Not only Annelida, we're also going to be learning about briefly about the whole anatomy of, or the anatomical structures that belonging to the earthworm. Alright, so let's begin with the phylum Annelida. Alright, here we go. Annelida, the whole thing is about round or the ringworms, because the word annulus means ring, and this name itself was coined by Lamarck, that is a scientist. Alright, these worms that are there, they are the commonly ones which are called as the ringworms. Alright, why are they called as ringworms? Because when you take a cross section, then each cross section, the external structure of this worm is looking just like that, as a ring. That's why these worms are also called as ringworms. The very most important example belonging to phylum Annelida would be that of an earthworm. Now, you need to know the scientific name of earthworm, because in many MCQs, they're not going to be giving you the name earthworm, but they will be locating, or they would be only mentioning the scientific name, and that would be Pheretima. So, Pheretima is the scientific name of earthworm. Alright. Now, when we're talking about the habitat of an earthworm, we always began every phylum indicating the habitat of that organism. So, when we're talking about the annelids, these annelids are going to be mostly, they are found to be aquatic. Either they could be present in marine water, or they may also be present in fresh water. We see that some are even, rather most of them are free living, like how you see earthworms. They're all free living. They are not parasitic. When I say that they are free living, what I basically mean is they are not parasitic. Now, along with the aquatic ones, we also find the ones like earthworms which are found on land. So you may say that the annelids could be terrestrial as well. Now, along with free living, okay, some or very few of them may be parasitic, okay. Now, when I say parasitic, have you heard of leeches? So, leeches are those examples which are parasitic because they are feeding on your blood, all right. So, few may be parasitic, but the ones which are free living are mostly going to be aquatic, all right. So, we see here when we're talking about an earthworm, or rather when we're talking about an animal belonging to the phylum Annelida, they may be aquatic or they may be terrestrial, okay. They may be free living. There are few which are parasitic, and if they are free living, then most of those are going to be aquatic ones, all right. Now, continuing with the other levels of organization, or rather other ways that we can classify the annelid, okay. Beginning with level of organization, you remember there were different levels of organizations where the most primitive animals, that were those of the sponges and poriferans, they belong to the level of organization of cellular grade. When we come to the phylum Annelida, these are advanced animals as compared to the poriferans. So now these are animals which have advanced all the way up to the organ system level of organization, okay. Now, when we're talking about the body symmetry here, they are bilaterally symmetrical, okay. Remember the different types of symmetry we learned. Either the animal could be asymmetrical or it may be radially symmetrical. When we're talking about the annelid, these animals are bilaterally symmetrical. Remember one thing, when we say that an animal is bilaterally symmetrical, it is going to be always more advanced than that animal which has radial symmetry. Why is that? Generally, the animals with bilateral symmetry have in their head region, okay, they have a whole, either they will have a brain or they would have a set of ganglia which are located in the head region, okay. So that's what makes these animals more advanced than those which are having radial symmetry. So these animals of the annelids are bilaterally symmetrical, they are long and they have a cylindrical body, all right. Now we see here that the body cavity, remember when we're talking about the worms, okay, the three types of worms we had seen. First worm was platyhelminthes, the platyhelminth. The second type of worms that we saw were the aschelminth, okay. And today we're learning about the annelids, okay, Annelida. Now, it is these three worms where we have the different categorization for coelom. So when we're talking about the platyhelminthes, these are those animals which are belonging to the category of acoelomates. Okay, acoelomates. Then talking about the aschelminths, these are the ones which were pseudo coelomates. And today when we're talking about Annelida, this is the phylum from where the true coelomates are going to begin. And each and every organism after the phylum Annelida, or rather including the phylum Annelida and all phylums after this, are going to be categorized according to the coelom as true coelomates. May I call true coelomates also as eucoelomates, okay. So when we're talking about Annelida, we have a true coelomate type of body. Now when I'm saying that it is a true coelomate, what do I mean by that? True coelomates indicate that the mesoderm has been split in such a way, okay. So the mesoderm has been split in such a way that a part of the mesoderm is lining the body wall, okay. So over here in this diagram, this is that region which is lining the body wall. And then a part of the mesoderm is found to be covering the alimentary canal. So here is another part that's covering the alimentary canal. So now what do we see? We see that in between these two regions, there is a whole area which is an empty space. And this is what we are going to be calling as the coelom. So the coelom is nothing but the splitting of the mesoderm in such a way that one part of the mesoderm is lining the body wall and another part of the mesoderm is going to be covering the alimentary canal, okay. So we have a space which is there in between them, and that space is what we're calling as coelom. So it is our annelids which are the first animals which belong to the category of eucoelomates, or you may call this as a true coelomate. Alright. Remember one thing, that whenever you have coelom, that is a cavity, that coelom will never be left empty. The coelom is always going to be filled with fluid, and in these annelids you will see how important that fluid is going to serve. In fact, I'll tell you now only that the coelom inside inside the cavity, the fluid inside the coelom is going to be behaving as a skeleton for this earthworm. Alright. So let's see ahead. When we talk about the segmentations, do you remember there was a term which was called as metameric? Okay. We called this as metameric segmentation. Okay. Now, what was metameric segmentation? I always told you that when we're talking about segmentation, we have to consider not only the segments that you are able to view from external surface, but if at all you happen to remove the exoskeleton of that worm, if you remove the outermost layer of the worm, and if you are seeing the internal part of the worm, if at all you see that there are segments inside as well, and if those inner segments are coinciding with the external segments, what did I just say? If at all we see that the internal segments are coinciding with the external segments, then these animals are said to be metamerically segmented, and most of the animals belonging to phylum Annelida are seen to be metamerically segmented. What is this phenomenon called as? The whole phenomenon of an organism having metameric segmentation would be called as metamerism. Okay, the phenomenon is called as metamerism. Now, look at the diagram to your right. Can you see how the blue region over here is indicating the external part? Okay, can you see how that external part is segmented? Okay, 1, 2, 3, all these segments you can see. But then we also have seen that they have taken a transverse section over here where only the external surface has been cut. Okay, so on cutting, or rather on removing that external surface, you can also see that the internal part of the body is also found to be in the similar type of segments, just like how you have it externally. So if you remove the external segment, because the internal segments are located in the same manner, that's why we can say that these animals are said to be metamerically segmented. Not all annelids, but the earthworms, the most important ones which we are going to be studying, these are belonging to metamerically segmented. Alright. Now, talking about the digestive system, okay, the digestive system of an annelid, how is it? Remember, digestive systems could be either incomplete or complete. When we talk about incomplete digestive systems, these are the ones where there will be only one opening for the mouth and the anus. Talking about an annelid, these are those animals which have a complete digestive system. So there is a mouth on one end, and on the other end of the animal there is an anus. Look at the diagram given below, where they have indicated that this region here being the mouth, and look at the exact opposite end. Until that whole end is there, you can see how they have indicated the mouth opening, the pharynx, okay, leading towards the crop, the gizzard, the intestine, and finally the region comes of the anus. So, because there is a mouth and an anus at opposite ends, we can say that the digestive system is complete. Now, if I am saying that the digestive system is complete, we can head on to next point, that would be the body plan. What would be the body plan of an annelid which has a mouth on one end and an anus on the other end? Can we say that the body plan could be that of tube within tube? Okay, so it is tube within tube, where the digestive system is a tube which is inside another tube, that would be the whole body wall. Okay, so after digestive system, let's move on and we head towards its excretory system. Now, excretory system means removing of the metabolic waste. In our body, who does that? It's done by the kidneys. And the most important structural and functional unit of our kidney is called as a nephron. Now, they were not going to be using the exact term nephron here because it is an animal which is primitive to us. I won't call it as a nephron, but we can call it as nephridia. Okay. So this word nephro basically always is relating to something which is dealing with the excretory system. Okay. And also remember that these nephridia which are there in the body of an annelid are seen to be ectodermal in origin. Alright. So from those three layers, which are those three layers? The endoderm, the mesoderm and the ectoderm. These nephridia are the ones which are arising from the ectoderm layer. Alright. Now look at this diagram over here. All these blue colored tubules that you are seeing. Okay. All these blue colored tubules that you are seeing over here. These tubules are indicating the nephridia which are present in all the segments. Alright. Right from the initial segments till the last segment of this annelid, nephridia are present in order to remove the nitrogenous waste which are being made. Alright. So nitrogenous waste material, removal of that is what we're going to be pertaining as the excretory system. Alright. After the excretory system, talking about the respiratory system, these are the animals which are going to be breathing through their body surface, which means that their whole respiration is based on the very process of diffusion. Alright. So respiration, there is no different respiratory system, like you would not be finding any organs like lungs or anything, but the whole respiratory system is being done by the body surface itself. Okay. Moving next to the circulatory system, these are the animals which have a closed type of circulatory system. Now, what is the meaning of a closed circulatory system? It means that there are going to be blood vessels present. Can you see in the diagram here? Look at the diagram closely. You can see the presence of these blood vessels over here. One on the top. Then you can see that there is a blood vessel over here also. Alright. You can also see how the rings are attached towards them. So these are the vessels through which blood is going to be circulating in the body of this annelid. Okay. Now, where is it different from our blood? Even their blood is red in color. Okay. Which means that they also have a pigment. And what is that pigment called as? That pigment here also is called as hemoglobin, or it is called as chlorocruorin. Alright. Now these respiratory pigments that are there in our body, they are found to be present inside the RBC. Okay. So we always see that in our body, in the humans, in the chordates, hemoglobin is generally found in the RBC. But when we're talking about an annelid, this hemoglobin is not found in the RBC. Then where is it? This hemoglobin is a pigment which is going to be found in the blood. But which part of blood? In the liquid part of blood. And the liquid part of blood is going to be called as plasma. So when we talk about earthworms, their hemoglobin is dissolved in the liquid part of their blood, which is called as plasma. Alright. So it is a closed type. So remember that there will be the presence of blood vessels and hemoglobin is present, but present in the plasma region. Alright. Talking about the respiratory system, as we just said a little while back, that it is done through their body surface. Alright. Talking about their locomotion. Okay. Now they have special structures present on the external surface of their body, which is going to help these animals to locomote. Alright. Look at these small microscopic structures here. Alright, you can see them over here as I circle them. Look at this small structure here, and in the next segment, this small structure here. These small structures are what we're going to call as the setae. Setae are those structures externally present on the body of an annelid, which helps them to locomote. Setae are found almost on all the segments for locomotion. Some annelids along with setae, they also have parapodia. Alright, so here in this annelid, this part that you're seeing here that I'm just highlighting with red, these are the parapodia present. Alright, so poda stands for legs, so these are parapodia. Alright, also there may be the presence of certain apparatus which are called as suckers. Alright, where are suckers present? Remember I told you about leeches. Okay, so leeches are actually having the presence of two suckers, and each sucker is present at the different ends of that animal. So can you see how there is an anterior sucker and there is a posterior sucker present too? It is these suckers which that animal is going to be making use of in order for locomotion. So whenever an annelid wants to locomote, it's going to have the presence of these, either one of these three structures, that would be the setae, the parapodia, or a use of a sucker in order for performing locomotion. Alright. Now talking about the nervous system. When we talk about nervous system, remember two important structures. One structure, that is the ganglion, second structure, which is the nerve. When we spoke about ganglion, what exactly was a ganglion? Alright, ganglion was nothing but a group of cytons. Okay, and the next word that we are talking about would be the nerve, and nerve is nothing but a group of axons. Okay, so these cytons and axons are nothing but parts of the neurons there. All right, so grouping a cluster of cytons put together and a cluster of axons put together from the neurons. All right, so now when we're talking about the nervous system of this annelid, what do we see here? Look at that there. There are presence of cerebral ganglia. Can you see that there over here, right there written here? Cerebral ganglia. What is a ganglion? Ganglion is nothing but a group of cytons, and because this is located in the region where the mouth is of that earthworm or of that annelid, we can pertain to that region of the annelid as the head, and because it is in the head region, we may give it the name as cerebral, calling it as the brain of that earthworm or the brain of the annelid. So you can very well see that there is a pair of ganglia over here. Alright, so here is the pair of ganglia, one here and one over here. So the pair of ganglia is going to go ahead and it is leading to a nerve cord. So this is that nerve cord what we were talking about. Now that nerve cord is said to be, or is found to be in the ventral region. That's why we can call it as a ventral nerve cord. There is not only one cerebral ganglia, there is another ganglia too. It is present below the esophagus. Hence, we can call it as the subesophageal ganglion. Now, details about these nervous system of the earthworm, we will study in the remaining lectures where we have a good anatomy of the earthworm. Right now, for basically all annelids, what we can remember is that the nervous system of an annelid consists of nerve ring. What is this nerve ring? Can you see how there is a ring formed, okay, with the cerebral ganglia, with the subesophageal ganglia here and the connectives here. Okay, so this whole structure that you're seeing here is forming a ring, and this here ring is called as the nerve ring. Okay, it's known as the nerve ring. So there is a nerve ring, and then there is also the presence of a ganglionated nerve cord. All right, now when we're talking about the skeletal system, do you remember when I told you that annelids have a coelom? Remember, these were those animals which were the first coelomates. So we see that there is the presence of a cavity. That cavity will be filled with fluid. Now that fluid can be called as coelomic fluid, but it is this coelomic fluid which is going to be behaving as a contribution to the skeletal system of this animal. So how does it do that? First of all, we see that it has a skeleton which is called as a hydrostatic skeleton. Okay, so look at this diagram you can see here, where you can see that how the coelom is present. Okay, so can you see that this is one body cavity, that is the gut. Okay, and there will be a part of the mesoderm around the gut. There is also a part of the mesoderm which is going to be around the body wall. So it is this region here which is going to be completely empty. Alright, so this region here is filled with coelomic fluid. That's why it's written here that there are fluid filled compartments, and these fluid filled compartments are the ones which is going to be surrounded by muscles. Can you see how there are longitudinal muscles also, and there are circular muscles as well. So these longitudinal and circular muscles together around that fluid is going to be behaving as the hydrostatic skeleton. So we see here that the coelom is surrounded by a ring of muscles. Which muscles? the longitudinal and the circular muscles. These muscles, being muscles, the function that they would be doing would be to contract. So when the muscles contract, they will move the fluid inside the cavity, and that fluid is basically behaving as the skeleton. Alright. So what is a hydrostatic skeleton? Hydrostatic skeleton means the skeleton which is moving inside the body with the help of the muscles in order to provide it with support. Alright. So the skeleton system, generally we always heard of a skeletal system which is either an endoskeleton, or you may have heard of an exoskeleton. Now we come across a new type of skeletal system which is going to be called as a hydrostatic skeleton. Alright. Okay. Next, after the skeletal system, coming to sense organs. Alright. Until now, we have not come across basic sense organs in the phylums that we have done until now. Talking about the phylum Annelida, there are some sense organs. Which are they? They are the presence of eyes, presence of palps. Alright. So can you see over here how the eyes are present? Alright. You can also see the presence of palps, and also there are tentacles. Okay. Where are the tentacles? Look at this region here. Can you see these all here? These are the tentacles found. What are these basic structures there for? Eyes are basically for vision. But talking about the tentacles and the palps, these are helping that animal, or these are helping that annelid to feel any structure. When they want to touch, when they want to feel any body or any structure around it, any surroundings around it, that's what these palps and tentacles are going to be helping for. Alright. So the presence of the sense organs like eyes, palps and tentacles are there in the phylum Annelida. Next, talking about their reproduction. Now, all the animals, or rather most of the animals in phylum Annelida are bisexual. What's the meaning of bisexual? Which means that both the male parts and the female genitalia would be present in the same organism. Okay, there is one exception in phylum Annelida, that is the exception of Nereis. Nereis is a worm where these worms are found to be unisexual, which means that the male worm and the female worm are seen to be separate. Alright. So mostly even the earthworm are bisexual, where both the male and female genitalia are found in one organism. Alright. Talking about the development, when we say development, either we can say that the development is direct or the development is indirect. When we talk about annelids like earthworm, over there the development is direct. But then when we talk about some other annelids which may have indirect development, then in the phylum Annelida, if there is an indirect development present, then there would be a larva form. And the larval form of any annelid would be called as a trochophore. Okay, so this trochophore structure that you're seeing right here is a characteristic larval form of the phylum Annelida. Okay, but remember our very important example, that is the earthworm, is belonging to a direct system of development where there's going to be no larva form present. All right. Okay, now continuing ahead, when we see some special features like the leeches. Remember I told you even leeches are annelids. In fact, these are those annelids which are behaving like parasites. Okay, what is a parasite? Parasite is any organism which derives its nourishment by feeding upon another organism. That organism from where it is deriving its nourishment from, that is what we will call as a host. Okay, now these leeches are the animals where they are, with the help of their suckers, they are going to attach themselves on the surface of the skin. These are not those parasites which are found internal in the body like our flatworms. Since they are found on the surface of our skin, we call these parasites as ectoparasites. Alright. So these leeches that are present, these are behaving as ectoparasites. Okay. What do they do? These are the ones which are sucking the blood of vertebrates. So they suck vertebrate blood. And actually, because they have the ability to suck blood, They are in very remote areas. These are animals which are used during surgeries, used as medical purposes in order to remove any toxic blood or any infected blood. Immediately a leech would be present, would be put upon their skin so that the leech can suck all that blood out. Okay. Leeches are also used during operations. If at all there is excess of bleeding happening, then a leech would be put there so that the leech could suck up all the blood. Alright. Also, we see that the reason that leeches are put over there is that because the saliva of leech, alright, now whenever a leech is going to suck any vertebrate's blood, immediately you know that the blood of vertebrates have platelets in them. And whenever blood comes out of our body, the platelets would make that blood clot. So, the leech would never want that blood to clot inside its body. So, what happens is when the leech is sucking the blood of a vertebrate, the leech would be putting its own saliva inside the body of the vertebrate. Okay, I come again. When the leech is sucking the blood of a vertebrate, the leech inserts its own saliva inside the body of the vertebrate, and the saliva of the leech contains an anti-clotting substance. Okay, so what happens is because of that anti-clotting substance, the blood that it is sucking will never get clot outside the body. That anti-clotting substance is called as hirudin. Because that anti-clotting substance is called as hirudin, we call leeches as Hirudinaria. Alright. So the scientific name for leeches is called as Hirudinaria, because of the presence of this anti-clotting substance which is there in its saliva. Alright. Now, talking about some common examples belonging to annelids. Okay, the very first, the most important example for our NEET exam would be that of the earthworm, and the scientific name for earthworm is called as Ferretima. Now, remember, earthworms are also called as farmers' friends. Okay, they're called as farmers' friends. All right. Now, after earthworm, the next example would be that of the leech. And remember, the leeches had anti-clotting properties in its saliva, which is why we called it as Hirudinaria, because that anti-clotting substance was called as hirudin. The next example, Nereis. Remember, these were those examples where it was a unisexual annelid, where the male and the female bodies were separate. And last, we come to Aphrodites. Aphrodites are the aquatic annelids, they are commonly also called as sea mouse, because if you see the shape, it's just like that of a mouse inside the sea. Alright. Now, talking further about the phylum annelids, okay, before we actually start the example of earthworm, we see that these annelids are found in three classes. Okay, the three classes would be first. The first class is called as Polychaeta, the second one is called as Oligochaeta, and the third one is called as Hirudinea. Now, when we talk about Polychaeta and Oligochaeta, now the common word between both of them is chaeta, okay, and the different words would be poly and olig. Now remember one thing, the word poly means many, alright, and the word olig means few. So that's out of the way. Now our question would be, what is the meaning of chaeta? Now let's see here. Let's begin with the class which is called as Polychaeta. In Polychaeta, poly means many and chaeta means setae. What were setae? Remember, setae were those small microscopic structures which were present on the segments in order for that annelid to perform locomotion. Okay, so in Polychaeta we see that these are the ones which are mostly the marine annelids. Now, in the beginning of this lecture, we saw when we're talking about an annelid, it could be either found aquatic or it may be terrestrial. Okay, talking about the aquatic ones or the marine ones, these are the ones which are mostly Polychaeta. We see that these marine annelids, they are commonly called as bristle worms. Okay, so what you see over here, this is a bristle worm and it is freely moving, and they either may be free moving or they might be burrowing also. Okay, burrowing, which means that it may be digging inside the sand, inside the sea, or it may be tuberculous, that is tube dwelling. All right. Now also we see that these are examples where they have a head which is a very distinct part of its body, and that head is there with the presence of eyes. Also they have the sense organs, which are the tentacles that you can see here. Okay, then they also have these pulps present here. So these are those animals where the sense organs are quite highly developed as compared to the other annelids, and also as compared to the previous phylums which we have studied. So they have sense organs like eyes, like tentacles, and also like palps. All right. Now we also see that these annelids, in order for locomotion, these are the animals which have parapodia. All right. So can you see on the body of this worm how on the sides there are the presence of these parapodia, and on these parapodia we will see, if we see even internally, that there is the presence of setae, and that too how many setae? There are many setae. And children, because there are many setae present here, that's why we are going to categorize this phylum as the class as Polychaeta, because Polychaeta means that there are many setae. All right. So we see here that not only are they having parapodia, but the parapodia have many setae. Hence we call this class as Polychaeta. All right. Next we see that they are dioecious. What is the meaning of dioecious? Means that the parents are separate. The father and the mother, means the male and the female, are separate. So dioecious, which means that they are unisexual. Either that worm would be a female worm or the worm would be a male worm. Remember, the animals which belong to this class would be examples like Nereis. All right. So now also we see, talking about the reproductive structures here, we see that gonoducts are absent, which would mean that gonads are present. If it is a male, there would be the presence of testes. If it's a female, there would be a presence of ovaries. But the gametes which are found in these gonads, they are not having gonoducts. All right. So in males, like how ducts are present, like the seminal like the vas deferens, or in females you have fallopian ducts. So here those gonoducts are not present. So those are absent. So if at all gametes are produced, and when the gametes are produced, they are going to be from the gonad, they will be released directly into the body cavity. So we see here that the gametes are shed into the coelom and they're going to be passed out. So how would the gamete come out? Remember, these are the animals which are unisexual. So from the male worm, the sperms would have to come out and they would have to enter into the female worm. So how would that sperm come out? If there are no gonoducts, then how would the sperm come out? That sperm comes out from the gonad, enters into the body cavity, and it is released through a nephridiopore. Do you remember what a nephridiopore was? Well, if you remember those nephridia which were present, then the excretory waste also comes out through that nephridiopore. So there are numerous small openings on the body of an annelid which are called as nephridiopores. So through those nephridiopores, not only does the excretory waste come out, but also the gametes are going to come out because the sexes are separate. So the male sperms would have to come out of that worm and would have to enter into the female worm. And how would it come out? Through those small minute openings, and those openings are called as nephridiopores. All right. All right. Now, in an earthworm, generally if you see any earthworm, how would you actually locate where is the head of the earthworm and where is the other end of the earthworm? So you look for the presence of this structure over here, and that structure is called as a clitellum. So the part of the clitellum, or rather the part of the worm on the part of the clitellum which is shorter, this part is located as the head of that earthworm, and the remaining structure would be called as the other end where the anus would be present. Now when we talk about these animals, the Polychaetae, over here the clitellum are absent. So when we talk about the Nereis, in the Nereis worm you do not find a clitellum at all. Okay. Just a little while back, I told you that they are dioecious, okay, and those nephridiopores that I was speaking about, okay, the nephridiopores would be like the pores which are present here, okay, all right. Next, the examples found in this class would be the Nereis, okay, also known as commonly called as the sandworm, a ragworm, or a clamworm, all right. Nereis is there. Also, that sea mouse that we spoke about, okay, it was called as Aphrodite, okay, Aphrodite, that is sea mouse. One more organism belonging to this class would be the Arenicola, also known as the lugworm. So, this class that we just spoke about has 3 examples that we need to learn: the Nereis, the Aphrodite, and the Arenicola, that is the lugworm. Please don't forget that we also need to be remembering the common name also, alright? After this, we come to the next class, and that is the Oligochaeta. Now, talking about Oligochaeta, Chaeta means setae, olig means few. So, these are those animals which are going to be having very few setae present for locomotion, alright. We see here that the most common example from this class would be those of our earthworms, okay. So, it is earthworms which belong to this class, which are found in moist soil, whereas there are some animals from this class which do belong to the aquatic ones, that is in fresh water. Which one are those? Those are animals, or these are worms which are called as tubiflex. What are tubiflex worms? These are those worms which you would find around an aquarium, wherever there are small fishes, even in the home. Many a times you would see that there are worms which are fed to those fishes. Those small tiny worms are called as the tubiflex worms, and these are the ones, because they are aquatic in origin, that's why we say that these are fresh water, and they're given to the fishes in the aquariums, all right. So the common example here would be that of an earthworm. Remember this part of the earthworm, this is that region which we called as the clitellum, okay, it was called as clitellum, all right. Next, we see here that in this class there is a chitinous setae, okay. Now this word here, please don't pronounce it as chitin, it is called as chitin, and the setae are made up of chitin. This chitinous setae are going to help this earthworm in locomotion. What is chitin? Chitin is basically a polysaccharide, that is a carbohydrate. So the chitinous setae are the ones which are helping this earthworm in locomotion. Also, we see that this clitellum that's present, what is the main function of it? The main function of the clitellum would be during breeding season, during reproduction. The clitellum is that region from where this earthworm will be secreting a cocoon in order for covering or protecting its young one, alright. Remember, earthworms are having direct sense of development. So, in order to protect the young one, because that young one is being formed externally, the young one of the earthworm does not actually grow inside the body, but actually it's happening outside the body. So, it requires some protection. That protection is going to be coming out through the clitellum of this earthworm. Alright. So, it is the clitellum which is helping that earthworm form a cocoon during its breeding season in order to protect its young one. We see that these are bisexual animals, which we can call as monoecious, which means that on one organism, the male reproductive organs and the female reproductive organs both would be present at the same time. The development here is direct, which would mean that there is absolutely no larva form present, alright. So here the examples that we're going to be studying would be Ferritema in the future lectures, and also there are examples here like the Megascolex and also the tubiflex that we spoke about. Remember, tubiflex are those worms which we are finding around the aquatic or around the aquariums of your home, alright. So here they are, a whole bunch of tubiflex worms which are fed to the small fishes, alright. The third and the final class that we're going to speak about are those of the leeches. The leeches belong to a class which are called as Hirudinea, and Hirudinos or Hirudos means leech, alright. Now these leeches are said to be or seen to be completely ectoparasites, alright, and they live in fresh water. Now, Some of the leeches we see, they are found either marine, okay, either they could be in the marine waters, all right. Others may also be found on the moist land. We can see that some are terrestrial, some are land occupying. When we see the body of the leech, you can see that it is not looking like a typical worm, but it is flattened, and it is flattened both dorsally as well as ventrally. So we say that this worm is said to be dorso-ventrally flattened body. All right. We also see that talking about the number of segments of this leech, then there are a definite number of segments. Okay. So the number of segments in the leeches are always going to be remaining constant, and we see that externally those segments are divided only externally, which means that there is no internal segmentation. And these are those animals belonging to annelids, but they don't have metamerically segmentation because they have no internal segmentation at all. So whatever segmentation you are seeing belonging to a leech would be found to be only externally. Internal segmentation is absolutely not present. All right. We see here that the clitellum does appear in leeches, but unlike earthworms, the clitellum is found only during their breeding or during their reproductive season. Okay. In earthworms, we see that clitellum is present right from the beginning and stays for throughout the life of that earthworm. All right. But in the leeches, the clitellum is found to be present only during its breeding season. Alright, now talking about the body of a leech, alright, we see that the coelom, remember these are coelomatic, okay, or these are coelomates. The coelom is filled with a tissue, and that tissue is called as the botryoidal tissue, okay. What is this botryoidal tissue? These are tissues which are having several functions. They could be performing functions like excretion, alright. They could also be performing functions like storing iron, storing calcium, and also remember they are performing functions like revascularization. What do you mean by revascularization? Re means again, vascular means the blood vessels. So basically the formation of new blood vessels if in case there is any injury in that region. Okay, so there will be revascularization in any area where injury would be present. All right. Okay, now talking ahead, we see that in these leeches they are monoecious. Monoecious means that they are going to be having, or they are hermaphrodite, which means that both the male and the female sex organs are present in the same organism. Okay. The very common examples that we find here are the leech which is Hirudinea. These are those freshwater leeches. Okay. Then we have another example, and that example is called as the Pontobdella, which are none other than the marine water leeches. Okay. And also I told you that the leeches can be found to be terrestrial also. So the land leeches are the third one that you're seeing over here, and these are called as, they're known as Hemadipsa. Okay, the Hemadipsa leeches are the land leeches. All right. So we saw examples from all the three classes. All right. Remember the three classes were based on first the number of setae, whether it was Polychaeta or it was Oligochaeta or it is a leech, then we will call as we would name it as the leech, that is the Hirudin. All right. Remember the important points that we learnt about annelids. Okay. Annelids, these are the very first animals which have a complete organ system. Okay, they have organ system level of organization. Okay, we also see that these are the ones which are having a tube within tube body plan. Okay, also we see that they are triploblastic animals. Triploblastic. Okay, talking about the coelom, then these are true coelomates, or you may call them as eucoelomates. All right. The body is filled with a fluid, and that fluid is helping in the skeleton along with the muscles present there, and that type of skeleton is called as a hydrostatic skeleton. hydrostatic skeleton. All right. We also had seen that there are presence of locomotory structures. Remember the locomotory structures present there? They would be setae. Okay. Other locomotory structures are the parapodia. And when we talk about leeches, how are leeches locomoting? By the presence of suckers. Okay, suckers are present. Okay, what other, do you remember other points that we did over here? Most of these animals are seen to be having only one parent. So we can say that they are mostly hermaphrodite. Okay, they are mostly hermaphrodite. Also, in annelids, we saw that the excretory organs are there in the form of nephridia. Okay, hermaphrodite, what was the exception? An exception would be that was that of the Nereis. Okay, which was unisexual, where you would have a male and a female in separate worms. All right, nephridia were present for the organs for excretion. Then talking about the reproductive part, you remember that there were gonads present, but whenever gametes, okay, whenever gametes wanted to come out, gametes would come out through those small openings, those small pores, which were called as nephridiopores. They were called as nephridiopores. All right. We also saw that after the reproductive system, what about the respiratory system? They were breathing through their body surface. Okay, they were breathing through their body surface. Then we also saw the digestive system. It was a tube within tube body plan, which indicates that the digestive system is complete. So, digestive system was complete. Okay, there was a complete digestive system, and there was on one end there was a mouth, and on the other end there was the presence of the anus. So there was a mouth and then there was an anus. All right. Then what other points do you remember? Remember that there were 3 classes involved. Okay. What were the 3 classes? Okay. Before the classes, remember the different sense organs? There were sense organs. And those sense organs, there were 3 different types of sense organs. We saw the presence of eyes. Okay. We saw the presence of tentacles. And we also saw the presence of palps. Eyes, tentacles and palps. These were 3 types of sense organs that we had seen. Okay. Remember the locomotory structures, and those locomotory structures, they were, first they were the setae, second they were the parapodia. All right, and when we spoke about leeches, we had the suckers. All right, which we just spoke over here. All right, then we saw that there were the presence of 3 classes. Which were those 3 classes present? Those classes, first of all, remember that the classes was based upon the number of setae. All right, so if there were many setae, then we call that as Polychaeta. If there were less setae, then we call those as Oligochaeta. And if the animal was that of a leech, then we call it as Hirudinea. All right. Remember the main anticoagulant which was present in the saliva of leech, and that anticoagulant was called as hirudin. All right. This is the reason why whenever a leech would suck the blood of a vertebrate, that blood would not coagulate, or that blood would not clot after coming out of the body of that vertebrate. All right. So this completes our whole session on only the general characteristics of the phylum Annelida. All right. Now, speaking about our next lectures, we'll be taking you into a brief info about the anatomical structures of only about Pheretima. What is Pheretima? Pheretima was the scientific name for an earthworm. So we're going to be discussing about the digestive system, the external features, the reproductive system of an earthworm, okay, in our following lectures. Today we just spoke about phylum Annelida. All right. So Until our next lecture, do stay home, stay